Well, look, we're running a little bit behind time, and that's fine, I think, because our dancers, Nunkery dancers, will come on after this. So our wind-up is really going to start by giving a couple of observations. Firstly, I think it's been an excellent conference, and for me, it's been one of the best that I've actually ever attended, because we've had people here from the very beginning who stayed, except if they had to catch planes and so forth. Excuse me. It's been a very informative, interesting, respectful, caring, and most importantly, safe venue and safe conference for everybody. Pat and I would really like to thank everybody for your participation, and firstly for participating, for being respectful, and particularly in listening to other people's points of view with limited challenge, for understanding, which is most important for all of us to understand that we are a very diverse nation, both from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspective, but as a society generally. And those understandings are most important. For being apolitical, and I think that's been really important, that we haven't tried to get into any party politics and bring that in, although, you know, we've acknowledged some ministers of government and opposition as we've gone along, and I think that's important. But to remember that this goes across all political boundaries, these issues, and what we call on is really the bipartisan approach to be maintained in suicide prevention and all of Indigenous affairs, so that it's irrespective of who's in government at any one time, that these issues stay on the agenda and be addressed appropriately. For being able to stick to the agenda is most important, and it wasn't derailed in any way. And I think that it's a credit to all the participants and generally for sticking to time, although we went over and there have been some interesting discussions. So they're just some of the observations and what we wanted to thank you for. We wanted to thank everybody for putting all your comments on the butcher's paper that's around the walls. Most important that they're recorded. We also, we're going to work with the butcher's papers for the outcomes of the concurrent sessions as we went along. Any suggestions that people have made on the evaluation form will all be addressed, and I'll tell you how we're going to do it. I wanted to remind everybody about the purpose of this conference, and whilst the topic is on suicide prevention, it was an outcome of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Suicide Prevention Evaluation Project, and it's one of our outcomes there, because we wanted this conference and what we learnt at this conference to inform that bigger report, the bigger evaluation that's going to go to government at a future time. We've got maybe a little bit more time up our sleeve now that we'll be going into caretaker period very shortly, and that'll give us time to pull it all together in what we've done. All the material that we've collected, including the videos of sessions, photographs that were taken, the PowerPoints during presentations, will all be put up onto the ATSIPEP website, and that'll progressively happen over time. The challenge we have is that this is a project. We were funded for a certain amount of money to do the evaluation project. What happens in the future, we're still got to try and find some funding for to be able to maintain these records, or look at some other way of making sure that there's some longevity in what we do. The outcomes of the conference, I think, are going to be critically important, and once they get up onto the website, you know, we invite everybody who needs to get access to them to do so, and to start to use the information that's up there to start lobbying at both the local level with your state and your local member of Parliament, but also in any other contact you have into the future with other politicians. But, you know, just a little reminder in case you weren't aware that there's potentially going to be an election shortly. So now's a good time to help keep politicians or aspirants to be future politicians, because it's open slather now that there's going to be a double dissolution, so both senators and House of Reps are all going to be in the same boat, all vying for a job into the future. So now's a good time to keep the pressure up on them. I wanted to, with Pat, acknowledge Josie and her team for coming over, and the interest that's being showed by the West Australian Government, I think is great, and we need to be able to leverage off that. As far as the future conference goes, that is a matter yet to be determined. We've, as I said, this project was part of the ATSIPEP program, and so whatever we do, and I'm assuming that, and people have already said that it'd be good to have a future conference, we have to then start lobbying to try and get funding to be able to do it. We also have to do, and I heard, I think it was Vanessa or somebody mentioned that, where do we go to in the future, whether there needs to be a coalition of groups or a committee to go forward. Hopefully that's been suggested in one of the recommendations and up there that we can take forward. And I know that we've had people like Brendan Gibson and others here who heard what the general view of the meeting's been, of the conference, and we'll be able to take that back when they have to work with future people. We've got on the 1st and the 2nd of June the World Indigenous Suicide Prevention Conference in New Zealand, and I want to acknowledge again Michael and his delegation who came over, and the extended invitation to people here to go to New Zealand. And I think that's going to be useful. But what's interesting there is that their conference, the World Indigenous Suicide Prevention Conference, is going to have a very significant youth forum. And then the question was asked, why didn't we have one here? For two reasons, I guess. One is we tried to include youth in the. Remember, we had 80 bursaries that we distributed to members of the conference, and there was a significant representation of youth in that area. We had the youth forum at the beginning of the conference, but more importantly, that in the lead up to this conference over the last 12 to 18 months, we've had a number of roundtables across the nation, and we've had a couple of those have been dedicated to youth who have had input, very significant input into the development of where we're going in suicide prevention. So youth haven't been neglected, they're just somewhere here, and yes, we do here, and hopefully that's also a recommendation on the board that we do have a significant youth activity into the future. We will be, and it's been mentioned, looking to encourage the people at the New Zealand conference to consider Australia as a host into the future for a suicide prevention conference, World Indigenous Suicide Prevention Conference. And if that's the case, and we do get the nod, we'll be calling on everybody here to help raise the funds to conduct a conference, because these things don't come cheap, and we've got to be able to do it. And thank you everybody who paid to attend the conference, because it's your support that's given us the encouragement to go forward and to know that through your interest, and that's over 250 people have paid to come here. It's your interest that shows us that into the future maybe we can run a conference and rely on the contributions of paid delegates, and that's going to be critically important. We're not even sure how much this conference cost, but we had some money to start off with. Hopefully we'll have enough to not have to dig deep into our own pockets to cover it. We will, Pat's confident, yep, so that's good. She carries it. So for me now, that's about where I wanted to go in a roundup of where we're at, but to reassure you that nothing that we've said here is going to be lost. You've recorded it, we'll record it. It'll be up on the website so that you can access it into the future. We'll definitely, I think, have some recommendations, but part of the exercise that we've got is, like in my walking around, there's a number of common suggestions, recommendations, and we've got to sort of distill that down into key recommendations to take forward. The question of an implementation plan is an important one. Implement what is the question. At least with the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Plan, we had the plan, and then we had to get the implementation. We don't have a plan. We have a suicide prevention strategy that since 2013 has been sitting on the back burner because we haven't been able to attract any attention to that, or at least there was an agreement that we get the suicide prevention evaluation project conducted first and then see how that relates back to the strategy. But once we get that, we'll have something concrete to implement, which will be important. We've got some big challenges coming up in how the money that's allocated to suicide prevention, it's going to be allocated to PHNs, primary health networks. How that gets dispersed is going to be the real challenge, and we work on that in that other advisory group that Pat and I co-chair to the ministers, the three ministers, and provide them specific advice. So we've come a long way. We've still got a long way to go in being able to get real recommendation. And I should just also pick up on one of the other points that was made about coroner's reports. And I think what we need to recognise is that there's been a number of very significant coroner's reports made, and the coroner looks at suicides and determines if they are a suicide, but the coroner doesn't have the capacity to implement anything. That rests with the state governments who have to do the implementation. So I think from my reading, coroners have done their job, they've raised the issues, there's been some tremendous recommendations in coroners' reports. As there have been in numerous other reports, it's the politicians who we've got to be targeting in this process because they're the ones who have to implement the recommendations of those reports, both the state and territory governments as well as the federal governments. That's it for me, other than to say thank you very much for your participation, safe travels back, and all the best in where we go. And Pat, you wanted to recognise the councillors.